Hi, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Food as Medicine with myself, your host, Davyd Farrell, and the delightful Rebecca O'Reilly, nutritionist and naturopath. Hey, Rebecca, how are you doing?
Hi, Dahi. I'm doing well. Yeah, settling into these autumn vibes, which I'm, settling into.
Good, right. Well, today's our third episode of Food as Medicine, and we're going to be doing an autumn-winter food special, really, a seasonal transition piece as we go into these colder, more challenging months, particularly in the Northern Hemisphere. Obviously, our friends down in the Southern Hemisphere are moving more into a summery piece, so the energy is a little different for them. But up here in the Northern Hemisphere, we're going to be talking about these medicines that we traditionally use in the autumn-winter time. So where would you like to start, Bex? Because I know you've got quite a few food heroes that you want to share with us today.
Absolutely. I always have a few food heroes. That's like a tongue twister.
Right.
Yeah, well, I want to sort of just begin by talking about this time of year a little bit. Here in the UK, well, here in Somerset, I should say, we've got such beautiful autumn colors everywhere. All the leaves are turning and it's really, really magical. But at the same time, I feel always this time of year is such a big transition as we move from the more sort of yang outward energy of the summer into the more yin and inward energy of the winter. It feels like the biggest transition for me, of all the seasons, it feels like the biggest transition of the year. And with that, I often feel a sort of a sense of sadness at this time of year. Even though everything's beautiful, I feel this sort of inner sadness as the days get shorter and the evenings are much darker earlier. There's this real sense of, here we go, hunkering down time. And so when I look at the the sort of energetics of this, looking at, say, Chinese medicine and how they view the seasonal changes. And I love how they sort of position things, with the 5 elements. It really helps us to make sense of things. So we're moving into the metal element now, which is associated with the lungs and the large intestine. And the lungs, of course, are associated with change or loss, also with grief and sadness, but also with inspiration. With that in-breath, we have inspiration. And then the large intestine, of course, is associated with letting go on a physical and emotional level. So when we are talking about foods at this time of year, we can also look at it in that context of the 5 elements, which can be useful for helping us just to understand it all better. So then that takes me into looking at some of the gorgeous foods that we have at this time of year at our fingertips. First being apples and pears, for example, which are in absolute abundance here in the UK. I can only speak for here in the UK. I'm not sure about where everybody else is in the world, but for sure in Europe, we have lots of apples and pears at this time of year. And apples and pears are amazing. Both of them are amazing for calming, nourishing, hydrating the lung energy, which is important to keep moist and hydrated, especially in the winter months when we tend to be drinking less fluid. And also when there is sadness and grief, both of these fruits tend to help settle that sadness and grief, or nurture that sadness and grief on an emotional level. And apples are also a major colon cleanser. So the pectin in the apple really gets into the colon and sort of picks up or sweeps out all this debris, mold, fungus, bacteria, viruses, debris, you name it, it picks it up and it sweeps it out of the body. So there's that real sense of physical letting go, but also emotional letting go, because, when we're moving physical toxicity, we're also moving emotional toxicity. And the pears also work with this part of the body. They're amazing for, pears in particular are wonderful for constipation. And constipation is a symptom that can arise when the liver is very sluggish, when there's a lot of inflammation and bacteria and toxicity in the gut, for example, which can flare up at this time of year. So if there's an underlying condition of any sort, it can flare up at this time of year. It can flare up with seasonal changes in general. So again, pears are wonderful for working with the colon, just in a slightly different way. They have more of a soothing, gentle energy than apples. Apples tend to sort of go in and sweep it all out, whereas pears tend to really soothe the linings of the intestine, and gently help to soften everything so that it can be moved out.
Can you actually just share a little bit more for our audience who maybe not so familiar with how some of our organs work or what they do, a little bit more about the colon and its function in the system? How does it link to the other organs?
Yeah, of course. So the colon is our large intestine ultimately. Right. So it's the last part of our digestive tract, and there's different parts to the colon. So we have the ascending colon, which is attached to the small intestine. Then we have the transverse colon, which goes across under the stomach, and then we have the descending colon, which goes down towards the rectum and the anus. So It's quite a big, it's this big tube, and it's large, whereas the small intestine is sort of smaller and all sort of wrapped around itself on the sort of inner parts, whereas the large intestine sits around the sort of outside, in this kind of umbrella, if you like, sort of a square umbrella. I didn't explain that very well, but yeah, that's how I can explain it. It goes up, it goes across, and it goes down.
I kind of get it. I remember the pictures from school, but I just wanted to bring that into the piece, because how does our colon get clogged? Because when I'm doing clearance on people, I do energetic colon cleanses, which is why I'm just getting you to explain a bit more to audience who might not be so familiar with some of these things.
Absolutely. So this is really relevant to autumn, actually, to this time of year, because we can often produce a lot of mucus at this time of the year, because the body's trying to get rid of accumulation. It's trying to shift stuff before we move into a new season. And mucus in the body is it is a protective mechanism. So the body will produce mucus in order to protect us, but it's also this kind of sticky substance that debris and bacteria and mold and fungus and all sorts of things will stick onto. So if we are not actively clearing out mucus on a regular basis, it can accumulate in the body, in the intestinal tract, including the colon, for example. So if we're not cleansing on a regular basis, then the colon can get all sticky and and full of old debris that's not being cleared out. Also, if we're not digesting well, if our digestive function is diminished, which for most people it is, because with the lifestyles that we live today, the two main components of digestion, which are bile produced by the liver and hydrochloric acid produced in the stomach, they get broken down and worn out because of the diets, the very high fat diets that we have, because of the stress, the lives that we have. So when those two components break down, food is not broken down properly in the gut, and it sits around and it rots, and that creates an inner terrain that gets disrupted, if you like, and then that's a breeding ground for pathogens, and then we have this whole disrupted system. So you can imagine that the colon, which is the last part of the intestinal tract, is trying to deal with all of this, stuff, contend with all of this stuff, and accumulation happens. So I'll just finish that little piece this gets me very excited, as you can tell. So, an interesting thing that happens when people start to cleanse and they start taking herbs and things that act as a binder, all sorts of things can start coming out of the gut, including mucoid plaques. And a mucoid plaque is literally old mucus that has been sitting around in your gut for a very long period of time, and it hardens and it comes out in your stools almost like a kind of like an old leather shoe, literally. And it's that tough. You can actually hold on to it and sort of pull it like this. And I mean, I'm being graphic here, but that's the reality, and it is fascinating because, you can, in a cleansing period, I mean, I remember, I'll give you a sort of personal insight here. When I started doing a lot of deeper cleansing of my gut, and I had gut issues for years, I was expelling mucoid plaques one after the next.
Wow.
You know, they over a period of time, they were starting to come out. And I just thought, you know, oh my God.
Wow.
Oh my God.
It's, you know, I mean, we like to be graphic here on the Food as Medicine show, and indeed most of the shows I seem to do seem to be quite graphic in various ways. But that's all cool. I think it's important to get a handle on, literally in your case, by the sound of it, on what's coming out of our bodies. But, you know, all joking aside, well, maybe more joking, you know, it makes me think of two things. First of all, those horrible fatbergs that they were finding in the sewers in London. It's kind of like the collective version of that story, right? Clogging up the sewerage. And then it makes me think about sometimes when your kitchen sink gets blocked, and you eventually take the U-bend pipe out, and you can see that it's absolutely solid, and there's no way that any water can get through, which is when it starts gurgling.
So compacted,
Compacted, right?
Exactly. The whole colon can get compacted, and then can't, you know. I mean, that really is stemming from a sluggish liver. Ultimately, you know, so many of these things that are happening in the gut are stemming from the liver. So we always have to look back to the liver to see what's happening in the liver when we have a gut condition of any kind whatsoever. So I mean, back to apples and pears, you know, these two fruits are really wonderful for working with the colon in one way or another, both emotionally and physically. And I think it's always so important to bring in the emotional components of food, because each of these foods have their own quality. Like, for example, apples really help us to connect back to source. If we feel disconnected or disheveled, you eat some apples and you start bringing in this much lighter, much happier, brighter energy that helps you to reconnect. And then with pears, they're such an underrated fruit in a way, but they have this beautiful peace about them. So they really help to tone down feelings of anger or irritation or frustration. They have this lovely, soothing, peaceful quality to them. Yeah.
So also good for the liver, right? Which is often where we store anger and other kind of toxic emotions.
Absolutely. Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
And of course, apple it's not a spirit that I know or have worked with as a medicine, but I do know that from herbal folklore and mythology that the apple has got a very high resonance as a being, as a spirit, as a medicine. So I'm going to look into this more. I feel there's more that we could do with apple down the road, because it is a very magical tree and is often linked to magic in so many ways. So
yeah, and I find if you sit under an apple tree, there is this uplifting energy that happens very quickly. You know, it's quite magical. Yeah.
And of course, you know, you were involved in the dandelion immersion that we did before, and dandelion is another one of those plants that can help the liver and help reduce those anger issues. And then, you know, with the digestive piece, myself and Pete talked about this with the artemisias. They're very, very good for helping digestion happen. In fact, quite often, if I get indigestion, I take some mugwort tincture. Not that it happens very often, but occasionally energetically something can get a little stuck in the gut too, and it's like magically and physically artemisias can help shift those things. So wow. So good clear out on the internal terrain is essential, I think, right before we head into these kind of more inwards inwards winter months. We don't want to be heading inwards into a terrain that's clogged, right? That doesn't sound very nice.
Well, exactly. So this time of year is really, really important for cleansing. I would say that the transition between summer and autumn is the most important time of the year for cleansing. So I run a 21-day Love Your Liver cleanse in the spring and the autumn. So I'm just coming to the end of my 21 days with my current group. And it is such a phenomenal process to every single time it's different. Every time we do it, every time I cleanse and I do it, it's different. But it's really beautiful because you get that sense of it making space inside of you in every way to prepare you to go inward over these months ahead. You know, it's so important because the winter is a very, very special time for going inward and, you know, creating that space to be with yourself. And if the body is feeling congested and heavy and overloaded, it has a huge impact on our capacity to connect to ourselves, to source, to the world around us. You know, it has a huge impact. Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. And, you know, part of what many of us are doing with the videos and interviews that we've been doing recently in Immersions is trying to change the language around things to make it more accessible for more people. And I think one of the ones that I like at the moment is this idea of our terrain, our external terrain and our inner terrain, which is another way of saying, you know, our internal space or even our energy field, all of these things. And what you just said, you know, I think is so important, because in the Northern Hemisphere, when we go into this piece from, particularly from autumn to winter, we're shifting from the element of water into the element of earth, which is all about bringing it back into the body, bringing it into the physical, putting it back into the earth, but also going inwards. You know, winter is also the energy of the void, which sounds, people think, oh, that doesn't sound very nice. And it's like, no, the void is the place of creation.
Absolutely.
And so we're given this opportunity in the dark months. It's not going to be a very pleasant experience, right? And so if we've got crap in our physical body, we can understand that there's probably crap in our emotional body too that needs to be shifted, because the two things are often linked. So yeah, cleanup job is a ticket to a much more enjoyable inwards winter, I think, right?
Yeah, there is no question in my mind, no question. Which brings me on to the pungent foods. Because the pungent foods also really help us to clear, in particular, help us to clear out this mucus in the body. So when I talk about the pungent foods, I'm talking about onions, garlic, radishes, dandelion leaves, radishes, ginger, for example. And these foods really help to expel. They're expellers, you know. And again, we could talk about this on an emotional and on a physical level.
Yes.
So these foods are powerful medicines, really powerful medicines. You know, you can make poultices with onion, for example, and it helps to really pull out infection. Like if you're struggling with a respiratory viral infection, for example, you could make an onion poultice and it can literally pull it out, you know. So so the pungent foods this time of year are critical. And if you feel like you're coming down with something, then bringing those foods in very quickly is a great way to work something out of your system before it has time to get deeper, because there's layers to an infection. You know, if you're exposed to, you know, a flu virus, or, you know, some viral bug in the atmosphere, then before it can actually get in too deep, you want to just keep it at the surface so that your first line of defense can just eliminate it, you know.
It's interesting. I mean, I think we've talked about this before off camera, but many moons ago, I did a piece with famous herbalist Julie Bruton-Seal, who showed us how to make fire cider. And it actually contained all of those ingredients you've just said, and many other similar ones for exactly that reason, for expelling these kinds of things before we head into the winter season.
Absolutely. My only caveat with fire cider is that it contains vinegar, and vinegar is a killer for the liver. You don't want to be doing vinegar on a regular basis. So there's other ways of working with those. I would prefer to work with those foods in other ways without bringing in the vinegar.
What could you suggest then, maybe instead of vinegar? Not even if we use apple cider vinegar with the mother or any of these better versions, or...
So if you're going to use vinegar, use apple cider vinegar, but it's still vinegar. So it's very corrosive. I mean, think about what, even apple cider vinegar, think about what it's used as a cleaner. You could clean your bathroom with vinegar. So think about what that's doing on the inside of the body. It's very corrosive.
Can it not also clean though? Does it not have that effect of cleaning in the same way? Can it not work in the same way?
It would be more cleaning in a very corrosive way, rather than gentle cleaning. Yes, yeah, exactly. So I'm not such a big fan of using the vinegars in that way. You know, you can make strong broths, for example. You know, that's a beautiful way of working with foods. There's much more gentle approaches to, you know, expelling things than something that's quite so sharp as the fire cider.
Okay. So we're talking about onions, garlic, radishes. What else can you tell us about these plants that expel? And when is a good time to take these? Is there a particular time that you would recommend, or a certain sequence to working with things like apples and pears, and then these more kind of I mean, I've used onion poultices before. In India, they used to do it. You cut an onion in half and then put it on you, and it just extracts a bit like what do you call it? A castor oil pack. Works kind of a similar way.
Absolutely, yeah, exactly. These are I mean, these are amazing medicine foods that you can have all the time. It's not, it's not like you have to bring them in at a certain time of the day or even time of the year, but at particular times of the year, they are more useful than others because of this effect that they have in expelling things. So I mean, and there's lots of ways to work with them, like radish and dandelion leaves. Radish leaves, not just the radish, are an amazing, they're amazing juiced. They get right into the system when you juice them, and dandelion leaves are the same. That's a very, very quick way of working things out of your system. Onions you can use in all forms. You can use them raw, you can use them in soups. It both will have an amazingly powerful effect. And then a lovely way to work with some of these more pungent foods is to combine turmeric and garlic and ginger together, but as a juice, and you take it as a shot every day. So this is an amazing way of clearing strep bacteria from the body, but also keeping the immune system super strong. Wow. So that's just a few ideas around how we can bring those foods in a powerful but also more gentle way. Yeah.
Right. And garlic is obviously very well known pretty much across the world for its medicinal qualities. But what could you share with us about garlic, Bex, you think is relevant to this conversation?
There's so much to share about garlic. I mean, it almost is a king of medicines, I mean, again, we can work with garlic in different ways. If there's specific things happening in the colon, for example, or women with UTIs, then we can knock those out quite quickly by juicing garlic. But you can also insert it. You can insert garlic through the anus or through and into the vagina and you can keep it there overnight, and that will help to really kill off a lot of the bacteria that's being held in that part of the body. So garlic is potent, really, really potent. Yeah.
So it's almost like it can absorb those toxic energies or substances that then can be expelled like that.
It's almost more like it kills them off rather than it absorbs them. It just kills them off.
Jeez, that's really powerful, huh?
Very, very, very powerful, very powerful. So we also have to be a little bit careful how we work with something like garlic, because for some people it can be too strong. Right. For some people it can have a really strong burning sensation, and it's also very activating. If you think about onions and garlic in the kind of more yogic, sattvic sense, then if you're on retreat, on a meditation retreat or a yoga retreat, often those foods are not used because they're very stimulating. So in terms of the time of day, for someone who's very, very sensitive, they might not want to have raw garlic or raw onion in particular at nighttime because it could be too sensitive, it could be too stimulating for them. Or maybe they would if they were going, maybe they're going to a party and they just want to get a bit of a buzz, then they could have some raw onion or garlic before they go, although they wouldn't smell it.
They might be able to get a buzz, but they're probably not going to pick up a new date with that amount of raw garlic going on. Everyone will know when they've arrived, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is just a few more of their sort of powerful food heroes, but what else do you want to bring into the mix, Bex?
So the other foods for this time of year are the winter squashes, which are just the most, one of the most divine family of foods that we could work with. So there's so many different varieties as well. There's butternut squash, crown squash, kabocha squash, buttercup squash. And they're everywhere at the moment. And they're you put them, you line them all up together, and you look at them together on a table, and it's just this array of total mesmerizing beauty. You just think, wow. And these winter squash are really, really wonderful for satiating cravings in the body. They work very, very deeply with cravings, and they have this gorgeous sort of soft, nurturing quality to them. So they're very, 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 very nourishing. They work acidity out of the system, and in particular work with conditions of the liver, the spleen, the blood, the stomach. And if you think about the stomach and the spleen, you know, those are the earth organs, right? And those are the organs that are related to nourishment and nurture, and the energy of the squash. When the squash comes into the body, it has this very downward expansive energy. So you can think about the stomach sort of expanding and settling. So they're very, very comforting foods, but also super high in nutrients. Super high in nutrients. So if ever you're feeling, again, sadness, you know, the squash can really help to lift that sadness on an emotional level, but also very, very soothing, and different ways to work with them, both savory and sweet. So very often in the winter and autumn, I love to make these beautiful tarts with using the squash, the various types of squash, because we can use them savory and we can use them sweet. So I make an oat base with pureed squash with maple syrup in the middle, and they're so delicious that way. So it doesn't just have to be soups or roasted vegetables. It can also be made into a delicious comforting sweet that is also healthy, you know.
Nice.
Yeah, so lots of ways to work with those beautiful foods.
I love working with butternut squash. I have lots of great recipes that I'd love to share, but I'm not sure that they're going to get the O'Reilly seal of approval because they involve things like gorgonzola. So I don't think that's part of.
I'll give that a head shake. I'll give that a head shake.
I didn't think that one was going to get across the line, but if anyone who likes blue cheese and sage, get in touch privately and I'll show you the recipe. But officially, we're not condoning that kind of diet, are we, Bex?
No, we're definitely not. Not in my world, we're not. That's for sure. No.
But, you know, I think the point is that actually the squashes are incredibly versatile and you can do a lot with them. Stuffed squashes are really nice, particularly you can use lots of seasoning. You can put lots of nice medicine herbs in, like tarragon, which we all got to meet very wonderfully on the Artemisia. I mean, who knew of all of the Artemisias? The little old tarragon, the little dragon, was probably the most powerful of the whole family.
Yeah, you know? Absolutely. I mean, tarragon, I feel, is one of those very, very underrated kitchen herbs. You know, it's not one that we are sort of using on a regular basis, and yet there's so much that we can use it for, even though it's quite a sort of, you know, it's a very particular strong flavor. But I think once we understand its medicine and the, you know, the sort of deeper qualities that it can impart to us, then it makes it more attractive to be using, you know.
Right, for sure. Yeah. And so if we're thinking about, because I love doing things, you know, stuffed peppers and stuffed squashes and stuff, but what would you recommend to our audience who want to work with these nice foods as a good ingredient to work with, like quinoa or buckwheat, or what would you suggest?
What would I suggest combining the squash with, do you mean?
Yeah, if you wanted to do a stuffed squash with other fruits and nuts and stuff, I don't know. I can almost see the dish in my head, so I'm wondering what I'm allowed to suggest without getting into trouble.
Absolutely, absolutely. We can definitely come up with some beautiful dairy-free alternatives. So one lovely squash idea actually is to and crown prince. Crown prince are the round orange squashes that are often. They're not as heavy as a kabocha squash, but they're super sweet. They're delicious, and you can just slice the top off and clear out the center, and then you can make a quinoa stuffing that you can combine quinoa maybe with lots of herbs, maybe some onion that you've sautéed, caramelized in a little bit of coconut aminos, for example, which gives that lovely depth to it. And then you can add in a little bit of chopped nuts. You can add in red peppers, whatever veggies you like, really, and make a quinoa stuffing. And if you did want to add a sort of dairy substitute, you could add in a little bit of cashew cheese, for example, which works well for that richness. And then you can put it all in the oven, and there you go. You have your stuffed squash. Yeah.
I think you should set up a new business, Bex, squash delivery service for the winter months, because I'm already feeling super hungry now, and I'm thinking about, because we've got some squashes that grow wild here, also in the orchard. They're not particularly tasty. They're sort of a spaghetti squash variety, and I've had my eye on one for a while to do a stuffing. So I'm going to activate that idea.
The spaghetti squash are also very underrated. So if you just get a fork and you literally scrape out the center so that it does become spaghetti, and just steam it. And you can make a beautiful tomato sauce, and you could blitz up some nuts, some Brazil nuts, for example, and make a spaghetti squash with tomato sauce and like a Brazil nut parmesan without using any cheese. So that's a beautiful recipe. Yeah.
Cool. Nice. Yeah, definitely some good ideas there. And of course, once you kind of get the idea with one squash, you can just mix and match the same kinds of ideas and just play with things, right? And just use different squashes. I mean, like you say, there's so many, and they're so colorful. You almost feel they're like pieces of art sometimes, some of the squashes.
They really are. When I come back from the allotment with them, with a few in my hand, I think, gosh, they're so beautiful. I almost don't want to use them,
Right.
Yeah. So maybe let's have a chat about the berries, the autumn berries that are around at the moment, because these really are a potent way of making medicines that you can keep over the autumn and winter months. So here, for example, we have rosehips in abundance at the moment, and also the hawthorns. So the hawthorns are starting to disappear now. They're sort of coming to their end, or close to. All the elderberries have gone. They came and went so quickly this year before I'd actually had time. I made one batch of syrup, and then they all disappeared because of the warmer summer we had. They were very, very early and then disappeared too quickly. But we can make beautiful syrups from hawthorn and rosehips as well. And rosehips are an ideal food to be working with at this time of year because they're so high in vitamin C. So they have this lovely protective quality for bugs that are lurking around at this time of the year. The vitamin C in rosehips actually is the most bioavailable, bioassimilable vitamin C that there is from any food. And when that vitamin C from the rosehips goes into the body, it actually helps to transform other vitamin C from other foods into something bigger and better and more usable for the body.
Wow.
So for example, just drinking rosehips tea on a daily basis would have this beautiful effect in the body. And rosehips also help to break up. So when there's viruses in the body, the waste that's eliminated by viruses that we call neurotoxins and dermatoxins, this process of elimination, waste elimination in the body, produces a biofilm or a jelly-like substance. And that jelly-like substance really affects the organs. It can affect the liver and it can affect the heart. And rosehips really help to break up that biofilm so that it's not clogging up or affecting the organs in the same way. So they're very, very powerful and very underused berry, actually, because I think that people don't know what to do with them. But you can very, very simply make a syrup using raw honey. You don't have to use sugar. I make all my syrups using raw honey. So I just add water to the berries that I've picked and boil them down and then sieve it. And then once it's cooled down, I add the raw honey at the end, and then I bottle it up. So the same can be done with hawthorns, which are a big heart medicine, a big circulatory system medicine, also very, very powerful.
Right. I mean, rosehip I haven't worked with so much, but hawthorn I've worked with quite a bit. And, thinking back to when we did the dandelion immersion early in the summer, a lot of dandelion, as we kind of came to understand, even though it's a really great liver cleanse, it's really the whole point is to support the heart, the emperor. And Hawthorn is the plant that I work with. I also work with San Pedro as well, which is obviously a cactus and different, but their energetic qualities are quite similar. And sometimes when I'm working in the energetic healing space, I work with both plants as heart surgeons. That's for more intricate heart-related work. But if we can get our heart chakra fully resonating and in connection with that, then there's a much better chance that our central channel to our higher self is going to be much more clear. So this is also when we're going into the internal space during winter, we want that clear channel to our higher self, so that when we emerge from our kind of man caves or whatever from the winter, our winter caves, our bear caves, then when we emerge in the spring, in Imbolc, the beginning of February, we get all the snowdrops and that wonderful upsurge of energy that starts to come particularly towards the spring equinox in either hemisphere. Then, we've had all of this internal time, which is partly why I love winter, particularly in the Northern Hemisphere when it gets dark, because the energy goes outside, it goes all back into the ground, it goes all inwards. And so it's the most beautiful time to spend on the inner planes. But, it's so important that these organs or the chakras, particularly the heart chakra, are nice and clean and clear, because otherwise everything that's going to go on in the inner space is going to have more of that fragmented, distorted energy, right? Absolutely. And if the heart organ is pumping properly, then the whole system is kind of much more likely to be working effectively, I think, right?
It is. And again, that comes back to the liver. So the liver is in charge of filtering the blood. And if the liver is congested and clogged, then it ends up pumping thick and dirty blood up to the heart, which means that circulation breaks down because the heart is pumping thick and dirty blood around the body, which means that the heart has to work much, much harder. So Hawthorn is a beautiful plant to be working with for those purposes, but also rosehips. And rosehips rosehips are also a big heart medicine, right? I mean, they are, they are so heart opening. Their energy is so uplifting and heart opening. And also they're a very protective plant. So from they're renowned for protecting against psychic attack. So interesting, that they have these correlations, hawthorn and rosehips, and maybe for different people they step in different ways. For me, the rose plant in general, the rose was my first plant ally that ever stepped in, and it stepped in, so significantly into my heart space. It was such a it was almost like a shock at the time, because it was like, where has this come from, but it was so beautiful, it was so feminine, it was so gentle and yet so present. It was just amazing. So I feel very, very connected to the rose plant and to rose hips, because they've had such a big effect on my heart. And they continues to be such an ally. Always I turn to rose, always. So it's interesting.
It is, and I think the rose is often considered to be the highest vibration of all of the flowers. That's what we use rose petals for so many things. And it's interesting at this time of the year, or this particular time this year, there's a lot of heart-related issues in the news, right, for a variety of reasons. And I know from working with Hawthorn for many years and seeing, in fact, even a relative once who'd been on warfarin for many years and didn't want to be on warfarin any longer, and had been told by the establishments that he couldn't come off it, but he didn't believe that, and so he actually switched over for his heart condition from taking warfarin to taking Hawthorn medicine without any problems, which is not what he'd been told, but he didn't believe what he's been told. So I'm not in any way suggesting for people out there who are taking warfarin to suddenly stop, but as we can see from many other instances, that the plant medicine in its original space, or the medicines that can do this work, are often much more designed to work within the body than maybe a rat poison is.
Absolutely. I mean, rat poison and God knows what else. There's so many ways that we can work with these medicines, and I suppose what I feel so strongly about and so passionate about is to really help people, to become their own healers with food. Teach them how they can use food as medicine in their own lives, because it's critical, you know, in the world that we live in today and where we're going in the world. It's so important that people understand how to really use food in an appropriate and medicinal way, you know.
I couldn't agree more. And really, that's one of the big intentions of what we're sharing here through the Food as Medicine show. But it's also, you know, for those people that watch other pieces that we do on the YouTube channel, being involved in the immersions, it's the same message that we're all trying to share, which is self-empowerment. Understand your body, understand what you're putting into your body, good or bad. Don't put the bad stuff in, replace it with the good stuff. Find the good foods, the good medicines, and start becoming your own inner physician. I think this is where we're all heading in the new earth, and eventually we'll start to become so attuned to what's going on in the internal space, both emotionally, spiritually, but also physically, that once we start to put something in that's bad, we're going to feel it so much more strongly. It's just like, oh, my system's not liking that. I don't want to put that in again, whatever it is. Bad medicine, bad food, toxins.
Absolutely. And you know, when you do a cleanse, you know, cleanse is such an amazing way to reset. It's like it really clears everything out, but it also, you know, resets the body in a very deep way. And that sort of that reset process is just important for us to get clear on how things are affecting us. Because when you finish a cleanse, if you bring something in that your body doesn't like, it will very, very quickly tell you, you know, whereas in daily life, we tend to become more numb to things when we're doing them all the time, you know? Yeah.
And also at an energetic level, I think this winter particularly is going to be important for many of us to be in our hearts with many things at a more kind of spiritual, emotional level. And I'm sure many of our audience will understand what we mean by that. But do you have any more plans you want to share with us? Any more foods, Bex? Or
I think, well, just very, very quickly, I know that time is of the essence, but very quickly before we finish, I'll just say that two things that are so important to bring in at this time of year are both raw honey and leafy greens. So raw, I mean, we all know raw honey is a deep medicine. It's been used for centuries. It really works deeply with the immune system. It contains all of these incredible phytochemicals that are gathered by the bees from so many different species. And that's an important food to incorporate as we move into the autumn and the winter. And also leafy greens, because at this time of year, we tend to focus on, you know, much more hearty, warming foods. And we don't feel so much like salads, you know, whether it's watercress, rocket, spinach, lettuces, chard, you know, all of the beautiful greens that we have. But actually, those greens are so critical for our health. They have the capacity to turn our health around if we're using them in the right way. So even in the winter months, it's important that we're getting enough raw leafy greens, because they're packed with all the mineral salts that the body needs. The body runs on glucose and mineral salts, and really it's from the leafy greens that we get those mineral salts. And also the leafy greens have a huge role to play in emotional and physical detoxing, pulling things out of the body.
wow.
So I think that that's my sort of whistle-stop tour of autumn medicine foods, more so.
So I just have a couple of questions before we finish, Bex, and just want to loop back to something. So we're going to be doing a piece for the Elder Immersion that's coming up here on the Quantum Plant Healing website in a couple of weeks, which is going to focus more on the elderberries and the dark berries. But I just wanted to comment, in fact, here in Mexico, the elderberries are just coming through. So they are still in some parts of the world available. But it's interesting because the elderberry season, you have to be on it. I remember from previous years that it can come and go super quick. And, you know, I remember one season where the berries came really late and then we were only around a week. And I literally had to, you know, I was monitoring the trees day by day because the elder medicine is so important for the winter. And we're going to be talking more about that. But you mentioned something at the beginning, which I didn't quite get a chance to loop back to, which is the lack of sunshine in the Northern Hemisphere, particularly during the winter, which can lead to the condition known as SAD. Right, seasonal affective disorder, I think it is. And are there any, because isn't that down to a lack of vitamin D because we're not getting as much sunlight?
No, so this is really, really misunderstood, this condition. And SAD.
Okay, good. If we bring that then.
Yeah, so SAD syndrome really I mean, let's face it, all of us are, you know, when sunshine comes along, the sunshine has such a hugely positive impact on the way that we feel that day. You know, it sort of helps to open us up, it opens the heart, it just makes us feel settled. But when we're talking about SAD syndrome, the more toxic somebody is, the worse it will tend to affect them.
Okay.
So people who have a lot of toxicity in the body, a lot of heavy metals in the body, a lot of herbicides and pesticides, a lot of bugs in the system, will tend to be much more affected by what we call SAD syndrome. And this time of year is a huge, it is such a big transition, you know, moving from summer into the darker times, and that can really be a huge trigger for SAD syndrome. But it can be a trigger for another reason, because this time of year, also any seasonal change will create a lot of adrenaline in the body. A seasonal change just does create a lot of adrenaline. And when we produce a lot of adrenaline, it can feed underlying bugs. And that's what creates a ramping up of a condition at a particular time of year. And so conditions can be particularly ramped up around the autumn time. And then that can be a trigger for SAD syndrome.
Makes sense. Thank you for clearing it up. And so on the other note though, about vitamin D, because obviously we get vitamin D from the sun, so how can we replace that in our diets during the winter months when there isn't so much sunlight?
Sure. And, you know, vitamin D is important. It's probably not one of the most important of the nutrients, as much as it is sort of touted to be, if you like.
Really?
But it is important, and we do need to have sufficient levels. But really taking a supplement at this time of the year is the thing to do. I would take a supplement through the winter months, and I would recommend that all my clients take a supplement through the winter months, just so that we are getting enough. And you don't need a lot, you know, just 1,000 IU is enough. And if you have very high levels of vitamin D, it doesn't serve the liver. So, you know, out in the health world, that's something that's being pumped out there a bit, taking very high levels of vitamin D. It doesn't serve the liver.
Okay, interesting. And I guess my final question is, because I know how much you love the spud, wintertime is often a time when we have lots of root vegetables, right? And maybe that's a longer piece for another time, but just in the final couple of minutes, what can you share about root vegetables? Because obviously the energy of the elements is into the earth, and so it makes sense that we'll be taking our food out of the earth at this time.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, any of the root vegetables, a little bit, I sort of took the winter squash as an example, I guess, of that more sort of earthy, grounding energy. And the root vegetables, yes, they have this more downward energy. I mean, if you look at a carrot, for example, a carrot goes right down into the earth. And when we think about the body in that respect, you know, the energy going down, we're talking about the adrenal energy, we're talking about the kidneys, we're moving more into the winter time, the water energy, for example, the water element. So this beautiful downward energy, and all of those root vegetables, each of them will have their own quality, but for sure they help the energy just to keep grounded and down, which is what we want. We don't want our energy up and out, which is more of a summer energy during the winter months. We want to keep it contained so that we can keep warm inside.
Well, I'm a big fan of parsnips, so I like root vegetables.
I mean, yeah, and again, that beautiful, sweet, nurturing, comforting quality that parsnips have. You know, they are just a wonder food. You know, so any of the root vegetables really are you know, magnificent in so many different ways, and the potatoes as well. There's an abundance of them around at the moment.
Right.
So
well, maybe we'll go deeper in our next edition, which will be in probably deep into the winter months, and look at root vegetables, because they are very much a part of the winter season, I think, and a part of the winter diet, and there's quite a few of them, so perhaps we can explore that. But we're coming to the end of today's show, and for those people who've not come across you before, Rebecca, what can you tell them about where to find more information about your work?
Sure. Yeah, I think my website's always the best place to go, which is Rebecca-O'Reilly, OREILLY.com. I'm also on Instagram in a not very prolific way, and you can always send me a message there if you like, if you want to reach out. But via the website is probably the best bet. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you as always, Bex, for joining us today and sharing all of your wonderful wisdom about food as medicine. I always think it's super interesting. And, you know, we get into a place where I think that we're going to understand that medicine is around us all of the time, not just in what we perceive to be medicine plants, but in the food that we eat. And that by balancing our diets with the right stuff, we can always be putting medicine really into our bodies without having to worry about putting the toxic stuff in too. And I think that this winter, especially, this is going to be super important, that we're all cleaning our inner systems out. And of course, we've been talking about this for ages, about the need to detox. Even Zach, the Ascended Master, who I often chat to with Janet Trelawa, has been talking a lot, either through the talks with us or on his Patreon channel, about the need to detox, to get the heavy metals out, to cleanse the liver. Because as you said, you know, we want to be more light. If we're feeling down and heavy with those toxins, that's why we're going to get depressed maybe at this time of year, or those conditions more likely to affect us, because the heaviness is going to feel more heavy. So yeah, you know, folks, I know we kind of feel like we're banging the same drum often, but we want to be lightening the load, particularly this winter, for lots of reasons. But the lighter we are, the more easy it is to connect to those lighter frequencies, and there's lots of those available right now. But if we're all kind of chuggish and sluggish, then it's going to be a little tricky. So hopefully you'll be able to find some of the wonderful recipes that Bex can share. I think you have a bunch on your website, right?
I do, yeah. Never enough. Yes, there are some lovely recipes on there, so feel free to check them out.
And not a sniff of gorgonzola to be seen in any of them, I think.
Not
right?
a sniff.
Well, look, on that bombshell, we will depart the scene today. Thank you so much, Bex. As always, it's been an absolute pleasure to check in and chat. And please do reach out to Bex if this whole kind of concept as food as medicine appeals to you. I know many of you have already. I get many emails saying that they're working with you, Bex, saying that they're feeling the effects of the process. So definitely do that. And in the meantime, we will probably be back, I think, in about a month's time for another round of Food as Medicine. And there's lots of other stuff on the YouTube channel right now. And we'll be doing the Elder Immersion starting on the 22nd of October, which Rebecca is also going to be one of the teachers on. So if that also appeals to work with the Elder Mother and the medicine of Elder, then please do check out my website, quantumplанthealing.com. So thank you again, everybody. Thank you, Bex. It's been an absolute pleasure, and we'll see you all again very soon. Ciao for now.